So welcome everyone to Soul and Human, this transmission talk. For those of you that are here with me live, for those of you that are tuning in. And my intention going into this has been to channel this. I'm speaking about things that I've been relating to intimately for 10 years now, a cosmology, a way of living, a way of practicing astrology. And so when I attempt to speak on this topic, I feel like I'm a fish in the ocean trying to talk about water. And I'm able to do it. It's going to be different every time. And the kind of approach of going into it as transmission, as improvisation, rather than like a PowerPoint and organizing my ideas is very comforting because I'm speaking to something so vast that just feels like the most smooth, connected way to bring this information forward. Some of you may have seen my other kind of transmissions on this topic, and it's something I do to raise awareness, essentially, that I'm teaching evolutionary astrology and that this is something that I work with throughout the year. And then there's certain points in the year where I'm inviting you to come in, to come study evolutionary astrology. And one of those is coming up at the end of the month, but we can talk more about that at the end. So the way that I wanted to present it this time was through the theme of the spiritual partnership between our soul and our personality, our soul and our human, our soul and our ego even. And this one is really touching, humbling, magical to tune into because, I'm a romantic. I'm someone that wants to find my soulmate in this life. I'm someone that has had some pretty profound experiences in the realm of love and has not yet stabilized it into like a life partnership. But I've glimpsed this kind of thing, and it's something that has really occupied a lot of my consciousness. And when I think about partnership, but I dial it way back to this space of how am I in partnership between my soul and human, I do actually get to touch some spots that feel like the mirror for what partnership is and what it could be, right? It's this profound approval, this profound participation with this particular vessel that we've been given. Not only that we've been given, but that you could say that we chose. So I'll share a little bit about the cosmology that is behind evolutionary astrology. I wouldn't say it's only unique to evolutionary astrology. It has threads that may connect it to other kind of philosophical or spiritual worldviews, but it ends up becoming part of our interpretive lens when it comes to reading natal charts, counseling, or relating to our own. But before we get into that, I actually just want to invite you to drop in for a moment here, if it feels comfortable to close your eyes. And just to allow the kind of contents of your day or the things that led you up to this moment to settle and to soften. And to turn your attention inward to the expanse of the interior. And before we've really defined what we mean by soul here, I'll just let you feel it intuitively. Noticing the fabric of where your human begins and ends, and where you feel like your soul is at the moment. And to create an invitation here for your soul to come home even deeper. to softly invite parts of yourself that are spread out in other times and places to come back here. And even though this is something we're doing in this practice at this very moment, noticing that this is actually a pretty continual process. Does it feel enormous to invite your soul back to fully inhabit you? How does your human have to adjust or open or calibrate to hold such vastness? Then I invite you to place your arms around yourself or on a part of your body to just express a type of care and welcoming to your vessel here. And bringing this intention of care and friendship. So, whatever experience you have, if emotions come up, that's okay too. And just letting yourself receive this download of your person and your soul coming into contact. Then you can come back to this space in your own time. So, for those of you here live, feel free to share in the chat anything that you noticed if you want to. So, to come back to the cosmology, I particularly kind of grew up or was conditioned inside of a worldview or cosmology that was scientific and agnostic. So the, existence here was this thing that happened with like the Big Bang and then the formation of planets and then the formation of this Earth planet that has water and like these conditions for life. And then there's this single cell like bacteria or thing that becomes organisms, and over all of these years becomes primates and then becomes humans. And suddenly we're just kind of here, and it's like we don't know why, and we're these very complex beings. And there were multiple moments like growing up that this kind of worldview didn't totally sit with me, in the sense that I would have these glimpses of magical experiences where I would have something like deja vu and be given kind of an explanation for things that made them more inert, less magical than they actually felt. Like for me, deja vu, I remember the first few times experiencing it really did feel like I encountered a timeline, or like it got more extreme as time went on, having certain events, like having dreams of things before they happen that day or something, and just being like, well, what's the explanation scientifically or whatnot for that? But part of this worldview that I also found interesting to contend with was that we all just kind of accidentally were born, and we're all, given these different cards in terms of what circumstances we're born into, but that, it is just kind of a scientific thing. It's just kind of a biological thing that happened. And now we get to decide in this kind of existential way, like what to do with it. Whereas the cosmology that I connect with around evolutionary astrology goes more like this. So we start back at source, like this original kind of oceanic consciousness from which everything is connected and everything is one. And somehow within source, there becomes a desire to experience itself through the many, to begin to relate to itself from all of these different centers of consciousness. So what is once the ocean becomes like waves coming out of the ocean, and they do eventually return back to the whole from which they came. The soul is a distinct consciousness that emerges from source and has multiple lifetimes as its same soul, going through a series of different personalities to then eventually exhaust all separating desire, all the desires that made us want to try something besides being one with spirit, one with God, one with source, to have all these different experiences. Once we've actually fully exhausted that, then we return back to source. And that every single, so specifically through human consciousness, so I'm speaking of the human soul mostly here, not like different animal souls or different types of spiritual beings. That would make this a little bit more complex, so I'll just keep it with the human. Is that every single life that we incarnate into has a relevance to the thing that our soul is doing across a deeper arc of space and time, right? Like there's this moment of conception, right? This erotic fusion of energy that creates a human. And that being a moment among a series of moments inside of gestation and birth where the soul finds its wave, or like, this is the life that I want to enter, right? Not just the life that I want to enter, but this life actually resonates so profoundly with what I've been doing as a soul and where I'm headed, the things that I'm learning, the curriculum that I have here. If I spend, like 1,000 lifetimes as a citizen on this lifetime to being a king, right? Like it's not always that linear or something like that. You could go between different appearances of fortune, and the thread is this very particular story that your soul is playing out. It's holding some kind of thematic quality to it. So we see this lifetime, we decide to jump into it. But part of the experience of entering the human, of being in this incarnation, is that we forget everything that we've come from and this deeper awareness of who we are as a soul. But it peeks through, that soul consciousness peeks through our impulses, our unconscious complexes, our desires, right? It shows up in the kind of like a backlit, the backlight between everything that our personality is doing. Yet here on the planet, we may have this idea that, why would I have chosen this? Especially if we're going through really difficult things, or we came into an extremely difficult household. The idea that we chose this or that it was relevant for our soul curriculum can be quite offensive to people, or something that people don't really connect with, because we have this other very strong cosmological consciousness on the planet, Judeo-Christian conditioning, which has this concept of, the fall and of sin. So when we experience really tragic or difficult or harrowing things, the kind of Judeo-Christian lens, if we try to apply it to karma and like, why did I choose this, is, am I bad? Did I do something to deserve this? And it's a difficult thing to even hold or philosophize about. So if we bring this to a conversation within astrology, we have Pluto, which relates to the soul, and Pluto also relates to power. It's the deeper desire nature that has encouraged us to split off from source and to be on this massive rippling wave of lifetimes. The soul wants to evolve. It wants to learn things. It wants to have these experiences by which to discover itself. And when we're so locked in our human consciousness and our egoic consciousness that we keep rejecting or feeling victimized by the experiences that we're having, there's like this split between human and soul, where we don't want to necessarily find that fusion or that resonance. Like, if this is the life that I chose, and then inside of this life, this is the impasse that I'm at, how do I want to really fully meet it? How do I want to understand it and be so penetrated and opened by it that I enable my soul's wave to ripple through this life too, as opposed to trying to resist it and hold it back, or think there's something wrong with it, or think it should be a different way, or that I should be a different person, or that my life should have been different growing up, or that I should have different like physicality, different talents, right? Like, these are all just ways of avoiding or splitting off from the vessel that we came here to be. So I think there's something so deeply confronting about that conversation between soul and ego, because at times it can feel like such a limitation or such a prison to be here. But that's just one perspective on it. And there's like a deep lack of approval or victimization in those cases. Versus when we really take to heart this deeper question at every turn, what is my soul learning here? Or why would my soul choose this? Or what does this offer, the evolution of my soul? It's a much more courageous question to ask. Again, it's a slightly offensive question in different scenarios and to different people. So I always offer it as a personal thing, not something that you can, if you're a counseling astrologer and if you work to that place, you even have to mind your perspectives on what you think a person's soul is learning, right? Like, it becomes a dialogue. You kind of kindle a fire of like truth or philosophy between the person that you're talking to, as opposed to knowing right away if someone's experiencing misfortune or challenges in their life, that that's what the karma of that is, because we really don't know. But for ourselves, right, and for eventually a level of skill and client work where you may be able to see those things more clearly. But first, for ourselves, how are we connecting to all the initiations that we're given in this kind of human experience? So I'll bring it back to Pluto and the lunar nodes, which are a basis of this in chart analysis in evolutionary astrology, where Pluto is that deeper desire nature that defines us and is quite like archetypal, right? Like I have Pluto in the ninth house. And so that could relate to things like teaching, which I literally do. It's also a desire for knowledge, right? But it's a desire for expansion. And the more that I've thought about it and reflected on it, expansion is so deeply what my soul is connected to, but it's also the place that I suffer. It's also the place I get really attached. And this is where Pluto, we have this profound desire nature that creates attraction and repulsion in our consciousness, the things that we want to have, the things we want to get, the things we're willing to do, the sneaky kind of weird things we're willing to do in relationship to our desire to secure, to get things, versus when we're just so clear about our desire and we come into a relationship with it, there's a really strong power that shows up with that. And so for me, for example, what I've learned with this desire nature around expansion is that if I outsource expansion, if I attach it onto something that isn't actually within my power, that I create these strange dynamics by which to feel super powerless. If I bring it back to expansion and do things within my capacity, right? Or learn about the expansion contraction cycles and make do with the grief that comes through expansion, I have a much different experience. Let me know in the chat if this is making sense, if you're following, right? If you have any questions as I'm going, let me know too. The tricky thing about Pluto too is that not only is it like, it's our deep wealth, right? Pluto in some sense and definition actually means wealth, right? It's this undercurrent of our soul that's like the raw kind of soil underneath the plants, right? It's the root from which everything grows. And there's parts about what we have at a plutonic level that we might be in really profound disownership of from a human, from a personality level, right? That thing about us that we think is dangerous or bad or shameful or taboo is often in the realm of Pluto. These can be cultural things that we've picked up, things like that we got conditioned in our family dynamic. But you can also just feel it in the sense of like, what is your true, powerful, involuntary expression, you as a force of nature? And how does your human relate to that? Does it try to stuff it down? Do you get like really high off of it and kind of make it extra and make it really dramatic? Does your human try to like use it for things? Does your human feel really disconnected from it? So Pluto is this raw undercurrent. It's this archetypal energy of the thing that we desire so much that we split off from source to have this huge experience. And it only gets to express, part of the game of being a human is that we come into this vessel, which has this unique kind of personality and situation and circumstances and flavor, essence. And so it's a little bit like the house that you live in or the car that you drive, right? And I think I want to encourage the like this organic perception of it where the body or the personality isn't just this lifeless thing that the soul drives. It's not a machine, right? It has an intelligence of its own. The body has its own kind of wiring, its own intelligence, its own like oracle to it. Same with all your life circumstances, like the raw material, even the traumas, even the difficulties, but also your gifts and talents and these like raw things within you that you may be very aware of or that you may overlook. The soul is attracted to that. The soul jumped into that circumstance, this human, this vessel, for a reason. And the art or the practice of leaning into that in this life is how we practice astrology on the ground, right? We look at our charts, we get these ideas, we get the gnosis, we get downloads, things like really hit or resonate. So it points us, it's like a map. But actually, day to day living, it's very much a field experience, right? Of like, how much do you befriend your shadow or these deep sensations and feelings that live inside of you? How do you learn to work with yourself, right? Like the dance between my, wiring, the human brain like knows how to hold on to negativity and fear because of the way that we've developed to survive as a physical organism. And so on a spiritual path, you relate to your fears, you relate to your programming at a biological level, but you also learn ways to transmute it or to see beyond it. So the soul doesn't fully dominate the human, but the human doesn't fully dominate the soul either. But figuring out, that's why I think it's a partnership, or why I want to put it in that way, because a lot of people on the planet do have the experience of their personality dominating the soul, or that the personality is too rigid and it doesn't leave a lot of room for the soul to incarnate. And there's actually a way to track this in the natal chart, and has been like a huge ongoing practice where it brings in the lunar nodes. So if Pluto is this quality of the soul that's trying to, that has this intention to incarnate through the vessel of who we are, there's actually a history that we can find in the natal chart of the ways that our personality has tended to develop around that desire. And it becomes our comfort zone. It becomes something that we've yielded some gifts, some coping mechanisms, some strategies, but ultimately it becomes like this box. And then there's the, so I'm speaking here roughly of the south node of the moon, which is going to represent this karmic history and these personality strategies that we've tended to enact. And then if we go to the north node, we have this invitation of what's wanting to incarnate in this lifetime. These new personality traits or ways of relating to our personality that actually begin to make way for the soul to come through. So I'll share some experience of why I came to evolutionary astrology and just a little bit about how I relate to it as an example. There's so many different ways I could enter my chart, but the big one that I tend to share or really relate to that was the moment of awakening, was when I was 21 and had was kind of beginning to play with magic or law of attraction, and it was starting out kind of soft, and it started getting loud. I was having like precognitive dreams, but a series of synchronicities led me to meet this man who was an ex-CIA agent. And I'd spent my life in high school, deeply craving to like really get out there and live. Like I felt so bored in my hometown. I wanted to have adventures, and I read all these novels, like so many novels. I watched all these classic films. I got really into literature, and I traveled in my imagination because that was the best that I could do. Let me see if I can lock this meeting because people are coming in. So my whole life, I'd been reading these character studies that I'd been so fascinated by, and learning how to write character portraits and learning how to write And knowing that I was really like gifted at writing, but I hadn't like lived a lot yet. So my characters were caricatures. I was poetic, but I didn't have like the experience yet. So when I crossed paths with an ex-CIA agent who offers to, who's an amazing speaker, so fascinating, such a character, offers to teach me anything I want to know, I was just like, yes, it felt like my life had led up to that moment. Turned out to be like a very kind of karmic relationship. Um, it turned into a romantic thing, and I had this big spiritual awakening that was bigger than what my intellectual frameworks knew how to hold. I was getting all these visions every night. I was making sense of things from my childhood and in my family and about who I was. I felt like my soul come online in some way, but I didn't have like the real kind of grounding to hold it. So I start to have all these kind of ideas. I start to act kind of manic, sleeping whenever I feel like it, calling people up in the middle of the night with my visions and ideas, including my family, trying to show my family the way about magic and whatnot. They were naturally like deeply concerned. It was super out of character, but I was telling them this is who I've always been. I'm just finally coming out of the box. Like, we should be celebrating, And so it turned into this really epic disaster where my family thought that I was bipolar and that I was going to randomly freak out and have episodes for the rest of my life, that I might even be schizophrenic. And so they took me out of college, which they were supporting, and had me see a psychiatrist. And I had to fake my way through the psychiatric experience. I didn't believe in the diagnosis. But I was truly rattled by the experience. It was my first encounter with like extreme, devastating failure. And with that level of restriction, I became so deeply depressed and terrified that my life would never be enjoyable again. Like, I just had this really big awakening and like such a high. And it was like, what if I'm disenfranchised for the rest of my life? I never make my way out of this. I never find a career or a job that allows me to be magical. And I just waste away. Like, I was so terrified. So I began inside of that. I actually did find evolutionary astrology inside of that. It was like the lantern inside of that initiation. But this system began, like the intellectual frameworks of it began to help me to play with this idea of, how did I get myself into this situation? What am I learning from it? And how can I be a person, like actually be everything that came online in my soul? How can I express it in the world in such a way that I get to be taken seriously, not seen as insane, and to have like the life of my dreams? Like, that was like me at 21, having that conversation with myself. So Pluto in the 9th house, deep desire to be believed, teach, to share like knowledge. But I have South Node in Cancer. And so this kind of preoccupation with bringing my family along with me into the awakening was part of what did me in. I ended up learning, like North Node in Capricorn, it's been a lot about structure, understanding cause and effect and consequence, like getting out of my own kind of sheltered bubble of consciousness of where, I think that I can just shout my ideas from the mountaintops and that it's going to be okay, which, I'm still doing that to some extent. I'm actually on the internet sharing my ideas, but I've learned how to refine them and become more responsible Capricorn for my transmission. So this is like a very brief kind of way of explaining, like, learning how to lean into the North Node at that moment was, being able to play the long game, being able to do difficult things without immediate gratification. Those were all like really necessary experiences for my soul to come online. Before that, I think the idea of having to do difficult things, I would be more likely to be like deflated in a puddle on the ground, just like so overwhelmed, like in tears at that kind of thing, was like my experience of South Node in Cancer, right? But the more that I incarnated into those Capricorn qualities, the Cancerian, like emotional wisdom that I carry got translated into that direction. So we're actually just really looking at in this map, it's not always going to be that dramatic, this much of a flashpoint drama moment in life, but it's where have our personality structures become dead ends or loops or keep us stuck in the karmic material of our chart, where we have these same problems that happen over and over again. They get dressed up with different characters, and we get so lost in the specifics of the story that we don't even see the pattern that we keep playing out. What is the nature of that whirlpool? And then what is the chart pointing to in terms of at a very human level, right? Like, what types of things, if you lean into and move toward in this life, will your soul have more room to be here? Because you're challenging the habitual confines or security structures that your soul is used to, and that keep your life the same. Like, what's the evolutionary edge? It plays out in very small fractal micro ways too. I was just talking to a friend, and we were talking about kind of going through these big like freak outs, everything's so dramatic, but then nervous system regulation and coming back into peace with the self lets so much of that extra stuff fall away. And what is the nervous system if not tending to the human, the person, the vessel that our soul is inside of? So you can have all this like really profound spiritual wisdom, but if you don't bring it into the body in terms of a relationship with self, with nervous system, there's an issue in that partnership between soul and personality. And this is where, some people who relate to the idea of reincarnation don't want to come here again or think that this is their last life. And usually that's usually not the case. People that are here on their last life are like ascended master types or like saints. Most people have more karmic material that we're here to work out. And so if we look at that of like, what is the thing driving us to not want to be here? If that's where we are, it's like this resistance to the very human part of us, or it's a sense that there's too much of a chasm between our spiritual, imaginal, visionary life and then what's actually happening on the ground. And that creates, there's kind of like a tragic consciousness that goes along with that. It's actually quite a lot to hold our soul and our human. Sometimes people just kind of do one, where they're floating a little bit and they're in their soul or in their visionary consciousness. Or you have people that are more earthbound. This is what I was saying earlier about people that haven't really said yes to their soul in a lot of ways, or they're hibernating in that way, where it's like they're just following a path of what's socially conventional. And some souls, if they're like more in a phase of soul development where social convention is part of what they're working through, you can still tell when people feel connected or alive in the choices that they're making, that they feel like they're on a path, versus when the way a person is moving through life, moving through inhabiting themselves, feels like they're very stuck, like inside of the life that they've created for themselves. A lot of spiritual paths can be more ascension oriented, where it's like not focusing on what's happening here, but just kind of going upward or meditating and like leaving this kind of earthly world behind. I find that the spirituality that goes along with evolutionary astrology is about descending into form. It's about growing spiritually, like even deepening our visionary or psychic or clairvoyant capacities, which is bound to happen when we study astrology, because We're speaking, we're becoming adept at a language that allows us to read the cosmos and allows us to archetypally predict the future and allows us to sense the archetypal threads of the moment. So people do naturally become more intuitive through studying astrology, right? So our spiritual consciousness grows. That's one part of it. But then how does that play into what we're doing on the ground? How do we relate to the vessel that we're in? A really simple way that this can manifest if you're studying transits or working with transits, sometimes people have a type of ego pattern where they are kind of constantly going through struggles and complaining. And then at the same time, transits are seen as like, well, this transit might like save me. This transit's good. It represents good fortune. I'll just kind of like grin and bear this and wait for the good transit. But the thing is, the transit is like responding to what we've gardened and cultivated in ourselves and in our life. So if you also can see people who don't pay any attention to astrology and are just super living their lives and like doing it up, and the transits come and they're just like riding the waves and they're fine, right? So if you combine it though, if you know what the transits are, if you know what your chart's saying, you understand the gnosis of it, you get downloads that fertilize how you decide to participate, but that you are incarnating and being in your body and participating with your life. That's where there's this fusion between heaven and earth, or as above, so below, that's so cosmically inspiring and enlivening about astrology. But there's also an alienation between soul and human that begins to be healed when we practice this. Where imagine if inside of this partnership, you turned toward each other every time something came up. Or every time your human is going through something, your soul is invested in it. Every time you're going through something, you're invested in allowing your soul to guide you, right? Or you get a desire that feels kind of like, why do I want this? Or this is a lot to hold, that you have the willingness to lean into that at a human level, to lean into the enormity of the soul, or to lean into the way that it provokes you to leave the comforts of your ego, right? Like those desires that are so true, but also so scary in some sense, scary to the ego. So this is something we can reflect on. We can find a template of our charts that allows us to really grok how these themes show up, the bottom line story of it, so that as these different, very compelling dramas come up in our life, we can map it back to these threads that we're working with. But it's also just so much of an approach or a practice inside of life about leaning into becoming friends with our desire, to not suppress it or distort it or ignore it anymore, to lean into the cultivation of our vessel or of our very basic day-to-day life, our routines, anything boring or mundane, as the altar of our spiritual life to incarnate through. There's a lot that you end up, being able to see, that you can take the chart away after you've like really worked with this spiritual practice or learned the symbols and whatnot. And you can just follow the wave or the thread of it as life is moving you to. So for me, I've been practicing astrology and practicing my life side by side. Now I've been working with evolutionary astrology for 10 years. But I found it to be a type of cosmology that's been able to be with me through literally anything that I experience. But it's also, I think, hands off enough that it's like I have the map, but you know that the map is different from the territory. So your chart guides you to see things about your soul, but then you're at the edge in a place in your life, and the learning happens through your actual life itself. And then you have all these experiences, and the chart and the things you've learned with astrology can help you integrate that. And so there's this dance that happens in the practice of that conceptual or upper chakra kind of knowledge, and then how it's rooting or integrating into your life. So I think I'll stop here and just take some questions or reflections on the recording. So if you don't mind being on the YouTube video, speak up. You can also write something in the chat if you just want to ask a question. I actually want to talk about the, before I do that, the Evolutionary Astrology Intensive is beginning October 30th. And now this is part of a membership, Diviner, which is a year-long space where I'm teaching new workshops and classes year-round as part of this spirit of like really deepening your craft and practice of astrology. But the intensive is the invitation into it, where we very structurally go through the building blocks of the signs, the planets, the houses, aspects, how to read natal charts as a whole, so that you're initiated into the language. And while there is, an academic side to astrology, like we are studying these things, what I really encourage and highlight in my classes is that you connect, that you are in relationship to these energies, so that you're just having a conversation with someone and you're getting the download of like, I feel this person's very Aquarian, right? Because you know the energy of Aquarius and you can feel it in the field. You can sense it without having the chart even come up. So you learn how to see life all around you, speaking this archetypal language. And it can become like quite animist, like it's very synchronistic or it's very magical to be able to perceive the world through this lens. And you see that the archetypes and astrology is actually already permeating your psyche, it's permeating your life. We just learn how to identify it so that you can recognize it and that you can become very fluent and adept, so that when you're explaining to someone what Taurus is or what a planetary placement is, you're not just drawing from your book knowledge, but you're drawing on your own empathy and connection to the archetype. And that's what makes it unique for you. So that's what I teach in the intensive, is how to speak the language fluently. But once we're fluent in it, I love to teach workshops where we practice it, learn new things, deepen inside of it. Because at this point, every time I learn the smallest new detail in astrology, it's like an acupuncture needle that sends this ripple of awakening through my entire life. I've had, it's just pretty endless how once you speak the language, the level of sophistication and intricacy and magic that it opens up is literally infinite. So after the intensive, I've been teaching it for 5 years, and I designed it originally as like, I want this class to be a gift to those who sign up for it, where afterwards they have their feet in the realm of astrology. They can read books, they can take other classes, they can just live, but they'll always have this download and they can keep expanding it. Like, I just want you to get the transmission. But inside of doing that, I was kind of sending off my students into the world, and over time, it became clear that I needed to create advanced programs for them because there was more for us to experience together. So I taught these advanced containers meteorite for a few years. And that's inspired me to create Diviner, where entering into the intensive, you're entering into a field of a year of study. You get the basics in 4 months, and then we play and do more experiential or expansive kind of workshops once you speak the language. So if you have any questions about the intensive or about Diviner, you can also email me. Thanks, Haley. And I'll leave an application. I'll send it actually just in like a follow-up email to all of you. Or I can also just put it in the chat too, if you want to apply to be part of Diviner and the intensive. And again, we're starting October 30th. Okay, any questions about soul and human, evolutionary astrology, the things that we've been talking about? Feel free to write in the chat.
Hey, Sabrina.
Hey, Eva.
Hey, I enjoyed your talk and your reflections on your personal life, and I was curious how you would incorporate like the soul and living in the human world, like having to deal with other souls.
Yeah,
guess-
anything in particular?
I mean, just the challenging souls that we are tied to. You know, we're coming into a time of really coming into our own and letting go of the past and letting go of like cutting cords. So, how have you learned how to kind of navigate this world? I'm sure it hasn't been easy having like chosen the path that we are also choosing, which isn't mainstream, and making those decisions that are not widely accepted.
Yeah. Really juicy question. So I think there's a lot of different pathways, and also the soul is so deeply unique that a lot of the things that we're, in terms of like difficult relationships are also a curriculum. And we might have our kind of karmic lessons with it, where the karmic lesson might be about cooperation and working together, or the karmic lesson might be about severance, and leaving toxic dynamics or something like that. And it's so personal. It's such a inward discovery about what that path is going to be. So I think that's part of the kind of the karma that we're like working out the knots of. And then in terms of like being in the world, I think a lot in terms of like the power dynamic of solar consciousness or like radiance, and how we have an essence. And when we share it out in the world, if other people have a reaction to it and we internalize that as a reason to like shut down our essence, then the way we're relating to the power dynamic is to be disempowered by our own essence and people's reactions to our essence. And so there's something about cultivating the capacity to back ourselves and back our expression, and also to soften and work out the kind of kinks that we have in the field. Like, for example, if we have this belief that like everyone's out to get us, or like no one wants us to succeed, and we haven't done anything to really alchemize that belief, we're going to keep invoking that experience. And when we heal those types of like deep like survival or like threat or distrust kind of things, there's a lot of for example, like there are a lot of people that are interested in the alternative like spirituality space, and I think there's that soul path of basically being willing to stand out, or being willing to be seen, or being willing to raise that particular type of freak flag. But the kind of ownership or approval behind it then gives other people confidence or willingness to back it, versus when we hold who we are in the world with this like edge of like, it's kind of shameful or something like that. So I think there's a lot of subtle energetic dynamics that go into it, and that at an individual level, it's going to be the things that we're working with in our chart anyway. So that might just also be like my Pluto on the 9th edge too, is that I think possibility exists and we can like work with finding, what it is that's going to nourish our actual path, what it is that we need for that, but that holding the frame of possibility allows more to come through. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I should name about this. I think also there's just an acknowledgement with soul work and like the soul path that things are not always easy. That we're like actually learning through initiations. And so being game, like understanding the game we're playing and then being game to play it, as opposed to all the resistance that goes into being upset that the game exists and being upset that we're playing the game and like the energy leak that goes with that. So I think there's a lot of healing that can happen with basically forgiving ourselves and the realities that we're working within, and finding a way of like, what's my most integrous, like in integrity with my soul way to relate to this. Maybe there's shortcuts that we decide not to take. Maybe there's ways that we do take a stand. Maybe there's ways that we, realize we've been projecting some of our own material onto the situation. But just getting more into that frame of willingness to play with the circumstances that we're inside of, because that's what we came here to do.
Yeah, I guess it's like a matter of taking the time for me to pause, because it's always after the fact or after the conversation where I'm like, I should have done this or I should have said this, because it's a test. I feel like everything's a test from the universe. But yeah, like things are moving so fast right now. I feel like moments or opportunities can like slip by for those moments of enlightenment to be captured, if that makes sense. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a learning process.
There is value in being reflective. I think part of what allows people to be present is actually really knowing themselves and like knowing their relationship with life and reality. And when we feel like things are happening faster than we're processing, I think it is a signal that we do need to like process and digest. And just because it already happened doesn't mean it's not still something that we can glean knowledge from. I have Mercury in Pisces retrograde, so I actually really relate to like that kind of cognitive experience of something slipping past me and I realize after the fact. And it's helped me a lot. Like I noticed that in times where I was getting kind of foggy, that I had to go back and reflect on things, instead of just being like, well, it already happened, whatever, and like brushing it away, but to actually like unpack it was something that helped me be clearer in the moment. And it's cyclical. I still end up having to do that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? Pluto is deep desire, yes. It's one of its core themes. Okay, if anyone has anything, let me know. Otherwise, I will close out. For those of you that are watching the recording, feel free to leave something in the comments and I'm sure that I'll get back to it. You can email me, sabrina@monarchastrology.com, to talk about the intensive and diviner. The links for those are also in the notes of this episode, or I'll be sending them out over email to those of you that signed up for the live. And I'll stop the recording here. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here live. And thank you for watching.